Sometimes the people who know your past the best are the ones who underestimate your future the most. My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my life, my family thought I was the cautionary tale. You know, the person everyone quietly points to during family gatherings. The one parents use as an example when telling their kids what not to do. That was me. At least that's what they thought. The funny thing about people is that they often confuse silence with failure. And for 10 years I stayed silent. I never corrected anyone. I never explained. I never defended myself. I simply let them believe whatever made them comfortable. But on the afternoon of my nephew's wedding, that silence finally ended. Not because I chose to break it, because someone else did. And when he did, an entire ballroom fell silent. The wedding was being held at one of the most luxurious hotels in Chicago. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. Fresh white roses lined the marble entrance. Valets rushed between expensive cars worth more than my annual rent. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas. Even a bright red Ferrari parked near the entrance drew a crowd of admiring guests. And then there was me, sitting in the back of a yellow taxi, watching it all through the window. I remember taking a deep breath before opening the door. The driver glanced at me through the mirror. Big event. Smiled. My nephew's wedding. He nodded. Looks fancy. Yeah. Fancy was one word for it. Intimidating was another. As I stepped onto the curb, I immediately felt dozens of eyes turning toward me. The taxi itself seemed louder than everything else. Its engine rattled. The door squeaked. The sound echoed against luxury vehicles parked nearby. I paid the driver, thanked him, and grabbed my small gift bag. The moment I turned around, I saw my cousin Rebecca staring. And I knew exactly what was about to happen. Rebecca had perfected the art of smiling while being cruel. "Oh my God," she said loudly. "Ladies, look." Several relatives turned. Rebecca covered her mouth dramatically. Emily actually came in a taxi. Few chuckles followed. Not loud. Just loud enough. The kind designed to make sure you hear them. I felt heat rise into my cheeks. Not because it hurt. Because it was familiar. Some families build each other up. Mine preferred reminders. Reminders of who succeeded. Reminders of who failed. And in their minds, I had failed long ago. Rebecca glanced around. "You couldn't borrow a car." More laughter. I smiled politely. "No." That answer disappointed her. Bullies love resistance. Without it, their jokes lose power. Still, she wasn't finished. "You know, Uncle Robert is parking his third BMW right now." Another laugh. Someone whispered something. I didn't catch it. I didn't need to. I'd heard variations for years. And honestly, compared to what came next inside that ballroom, the taxi comments were nothing. The ballroom was breathtaking. Hundreds of tiny lights shimmered from crystal chandeliers overhead. Soft piano music drifted through the room. Waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying silver trays filled with champagne glasses. It was beautiful. And somehow I had never felt more out of place. I stood near the entrance for a moment, clutching my gift bag. Around me, relatives greeted one another with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Look at you. It's been forever. You haven't aged a day." The usual family performance. Everyone pretending everything was perfect. Everyone pretending they actually liked each other. Then I noticed something. Nobody was walking toward me. Nobody was excited to see me. Nobody was waving. Most of them simply looked. Then looked away. As if acknowledging me for too long might lower their social status. I should have expected it. After all, I was the family disappointment. At least according to the story they had been telling themselves for the last decade. The truth was much more complicated. But complicated stories rarely interest people. Simple judgments are easier, especially when they make someone else feel superior. I spotted my older brother Michael standing near the bar. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect life. Or at least the version he liked displaying. He noticed me almost immediately. His smile faded slightly. Not completely, just enough. That subtle expression people make when they see someone they don't particularly want to explain to their friends. He walked over. "Emily." "Hi, Michael." He gave me a brief hug. The kind that feels more like an obligation than affection. "You made it." I said I would. "Yeah." Awkward silence followed. Then his eyes drifted toward the entrance. Toward the taxi that was still pulling away. Course. Even he had noticed. "Everything okay with your car?" There it was. Question. Wrapped in concern. Covered in politeness. But carrying judgment underneath. Smiled. "I don't own one." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You still don't?" "No." "Oh." That single word contained an entire conversation. Well, after all these years. Still struggling. Still behind. Still Emily. The disappointment. Before either of us could continue, someone called his name. His relief was obvious. "We'll talk later." "Sure." He disappeared into the crowd. And I stood alone again. Just like that. An hour later, dinner service began. I quickly learned where I had been seated. Table 27. The very back corner of the ballroom. Near the kitchen doors. Course. I almost laughed. The seating chart said everything. The successful relatives occupied tables near the dance floor. Business owners, actors, lawyers, investors, people who mattered, people worth displaying. Meanwhile, table 27 contained an elderly distant cousin, a neighbor nobody knew, a retired school janitor, me, the leftovers table, the invisible table. The table created so important guests wouldn't have to waste valuable conversation on less impressive family members. I pulled out my chair and sat down. The elderly woman beside me smiled warmly. "Hello, dear." "Hello. I'm Margaret." "Emily." She squeezed my hand. Unlike most people that evening, her smile felt genuine. No judgment. No curiosity. No hidden agenda, just kindness, and for some reason that nearly broke my heart. Because I hadn't realized how badly I needed it. As guests settled into their seats, I looked toward the head table. The groom sat proudly beside his bride, Jason, my nephew. Though technically he was my sister's son. I had helped raise him. And that distinction mattered. Even if nobody here knew it. Even if Jason himself didn't fully understand it. Not yet. My eyes lingered on him. 30 years old. Confident. Successful. Respected. Everything I had always hoped he'd become. Sudden memory surfaced. Jason at 11 years old. Sitting beside me on a hospital bench. Crying. Terrified. Holding my hand. Asking whether his mother was going to die. I swallowed hard. Not tonight. I couldn't think about those years tonight. Not here. Not surrounded by people who had never bothered to learn the truth. Dinner arrived. Conversation flowed around the room. Laughter echoed between tables. Wine glasses clinked. Stories were shared. Meanwhile, at table 27, we mostly sat quietly, which honestly suited me, until Rebecca appeared again. Course she did. Bullies rarely miss opportunities. She approached with 2 of her friends, champagne glass in hand, smile perfectly rehearsed. "Emily." I looked up. "Hi, Rebecca. We were just talking about old times." Dangerous words. I could already feel where this was heading. Rebecca smiled wider. Remember when everyone thought you'd be the successful one? Her friends laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. I remained silent. Oh, come on, Rebecca continued. You were always the smart one. Another laugh. I noticed nearby guests beginning to listen. Family gossip attracts attention faster than any speech. Rebecca tilted her head. What happened? There it was. The real question. The question everyone secretly wondered. The question nobody asked directly. Because the answer they imagined was more entertaining. Failure. Bad decisions. Lost potential. Poor choices. Those explanations made people comfortable. Because they implied success was entirely earned. That life was fair. That good outcomes always belonged to good decision-makers. Reality is rarely that simple. But reality wasn't nearly as satisfying. I smiled politely. Life happened. Rebecca laughed. Oh, that's mysterious. Shrugged. What can I say? For a brief moment, disappointment crossed her face. She wanted a reaction. Embarrassment. Anger. Anything. Instead, I gave her nothing. And eventually she drifted away, looking for easier targets. But her question stayed with me. What happened? What happened to Emily? The woman who graduated top of her class. The woman who received scholarships. The woman professors said would do extraordinary things. The woman everyone expected to become rich. Powerful. Important. The answer was simple. Life happened. 10 years earlier, my sister Sarah had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. Jason was barely 16. His younger sister Ava was 13. Sarah's husband had already left years before. There was nobody else. No backup plan. No wealthy relative stepping forward. No miracle waiting around the corner. Just fear. Bills. Hospitals. And 2 terrified children. At the time, I had been offered the opportunity of a lifetime. A prestigious position with a technology company in California. The kind of opportunity people dream about. The kind of opportunity people don't decline. Everyone expected me to take it. Everyone except Sarah. Because Sarah knew what would happen if I left. She never asked me to stay. Not once. In fact, she begged me to go. But I could see the truth in her eyes. She was scared. And so were her children. So I stayed. Told nobody why. I simply turned down the offer. Moved closer to the hospital. Worked smaller jobs. Paid bills. Picked up prescriptions. Attended school meetings. Cooked meals. Helped with homework. And slowly watched my own future drift further away. Not because I regretted it. Because sacrifices always cost something. That's why they're called sacrifices. Most of the family never knew. Or cared enough to ask. They only saw the results. No impressive career. No luxury house. No expensive vacations. No fancy car. Failure. Simple. Convenient. Well, but convenient. And once people decide who you are, changing their minds becomes nearly impossible. A burst of laughter pulled me back to the present. Across the room, speeches were beginning. The father of the bride stood first. Then several family members. Funny stories. Childhood memories. Heartfelt congratulations. The audience loved every minute. I smiled along with everyone else. But something felt strange. Jason kept glancing toward me. Again and again. Almost as if he was waiting for something. Or someone. I couldn't explain it. And yet the feeling lingered. Strong enough to make me uneasy. Then I noticed another detail. Near the head table sat several people I didn't recognize. Men and women dressed professionally. Executives maybe. Business partners. Investors. They seemed unusually interested in me. One of them even nodded politely when our eyes met. I looked away. Confused. Why would they know who I was? Why would they care? That moment I had no idea. But before the night ended, every person in that ballroom would know exactly who I was. And the people who laughed when I stepped out of that taxi would wish they had treated me very differently. The speeches continued, one after another. Funny stories, embarrassing childhood memories, tears, laughter, applause. Everything a wedding speech is supposed to be. But I could barely focus, 'cause Jason kept looking at me. Every few minutes, his eyes would find mine across the ballroom. Then he'd smile. Not the polite smile he'd been giving guests all evening. A different one. Personal one. A grateful one. And honestly, made me nervous. I hadn't expected much from tonight. I came to celebrate his wedding. Give my gift. Eat dinner. Smile for a few pictures. Then quietly leave. That was usually how family events worked for me. Appear. Be tolerated. Disappear. Simple. Predictable. But something about tonight felt different. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Jason knew something I didn't. The next speaker stepped away from the microphone. Applause filled the room. Then the wedding coordinator approached the stage. She smiled warmly. Ladies and gentlemen, we have one final speech before we open the dance floor. The crowd settled. Most guests expected Jason. After all, the groom usually speaks. But Jason remained seated. Instead, he exchanged a glance with someone at a nearby table. One of the strangers. The professionally dressed man I had noticed earlier. The man stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the stage. Immediately, confusion spread through the room. People whispered. Heard questions. Who is that? Business partner? Friend? No idea. The man reached the microphone. Confident. Comfortable in front of a crowd. Good evening, everyone. The room quieted. My name is Daniel Brooks. Several guests nodded politely. Most still looked confused. Daniel smiled. I know many of you don't recognize me. Few chuckles followed. That's okay. Tonight isn't about me. He paused. It's about gratitude. Something changed in Jason's expression. His eyes shifted toward me again. My stomach tightened. Suddenly I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the rest. Daniel continued. 5 years ago, Jason Carter walked into a small office with an idea. Several people at the head table smiled. He wasn't wealthy. Another smile. He wasn't connected. More nodding. He didn't have investors waiting to write checks. The audience listened carefully now. Many family members already knew Jason had become successful, but few understood how successful. Daniel continued. What he did have was determination. Applause. Jason laughed modestly. Daniel waited. Then his tone shifted. But determination wasn't the reason he succeeded. The room grew quieter. It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. Another pause. It wasn't timing. Now everyone was paying attention. Daniel smiled. It was because someone believed in him long before anyone else did. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Well, surely not. Daniel looked toward Jason. 5 years ago, when banks rejected his business plan. He paused. When investors laughed at him. When everyone told him the company would fail. The ballroom was silent. There was exactly one person who said yes. Felt cold. The kind of cold that starts in your stomach. The kind you feel before life changes. Daniel continued. One person who took a chance. I lowered my eyes. Please don't. Not here. Not tonight. Most people didn't know this story. Actually, almost nobody knew it. Not even many members of my family. Because I never told them. 5 years earlier, Jason had shown up at my apartment carrying a backpack and a laptop. He looked terrified. Excited. Hopeful. Young. He spent 3 hours explaining his business idea. I understood maybe half of it. But I understood him. And that mattered more. By the end of the night he asked a question. Question he hated asking. Would you invest? I remember the embarrassment in his voice. The shame. The fear of rejection. Because everyone else had already rejected him. Every bank. Every lender. Every investor. Every expert. Mo. I was his last option. And I didn't have much money. Not compared to real investors. Not compared to successful people. Not compared to my wealthy relatives. But I had something. Savings account. The last savings account I had. Money accumulated over years. Money intended for my future. My retirement. My security. My emergency fund. I looked at Jason. And I saw the same frightened 16-year-old boy sitting in a hospital hallway. The same boy I had promised to protect. The same boy I had helped raise. And I made a decision. Daniel's voice pulled me back into the present. The first investment in Jason's company wasn't made by a venture capitalist. It wasn't made by a bank. It wasn't made by an investment firm. Then he smiled. It was made by his aunt. The room turned. Almost all at once. Hundreds of eyes. Searching. Looking. Finding me. My face burned. I wanted to disappear. I hated attention. Always had. Especially this kind. Daniel pointed gently toward my table. There she is. I closed my eyes briefly. Wonderful. Exactly what I didn't want. Margaret squeezed my hand under the table. I could feel her smiling. Daniel continued. Emily Carter invested every dollar she had saved. Actual gasp. I heard them. From multiple tables. Because now people were doing the math. The woman who arrived in a taxi. The woman everyone assumed was struggling. The woman sitting near the kitchen. That woman. The room was changing. I could feel it. Judgment turning into curiosity. Curiosity turning into confusion. Confusion turning into realization. Daniel wasn't finished. Not even close. Many of you probably assume that investment made her wealthy. A few guests nodded. Reasonable assumption. Well, but reasonable. Daniel shook his head. She didn't take ownership. The room became even quieter. She didn't demand equity. Silence. She didn't ask for control. More silence. She simply wanted Jason to have a chance. Now nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Nobody checked their phones. Every person was listening. I saw Rebecca staring. Completely frozen. The champagne glass in her hand hung motionless. For perhaps the first time in her life, she didn't have anything clever to say. Daniel continued. When the company couldn't afford employees. She worked for free. More shocked faces. When they couldn't afford office space. She opened her home. Several guests exchanged looks. When Jason wanted to quit. She convinced him to keep going. The ballroom had become perfectly silent. Not because people were being polite. 'Cause they were stunned. Jason slowly stood from his chair. His bride squeezed his hand. Both were crying now. And suddenly I realized this wasn't Daniel's speech. Not really. This was Jason's. Daniel was simply helping him tell it. Jason walked toward the stage. The audience watched every step. He reached the microphone. For a moment he couldn't speak. Emotion caught in his throat. The same way it caught in mine. Then finally he smiled. Hi, Aunt Emily. Laughter broke some of the tension. Laughed too. Even through tears. Jason looked around the room. Then back at me. I've spent most of my life trying to become half the person you are. The tears came immediately. No warning. No control. Just tears. Because those words meant more than anyone there could possibly understand. When my mom was sick. His voice cracked. You were there. Silence. When Dad left. You were there. Tears appeared throughout the room. When I was scared. You were there. His voice grew stronger. When nobody believed in me. You were there. Every sentence landed harder than the last. Then Jason smiled. A different smile. The smile of someone preparing a surprise. Very big surprise. And suddenly every executive at the nearby table stood simultaneously, carrying something. Large black folders, several metal cases, and one small velvet box. The crowd exchanged confused looks. I felt my stomach drop, because I had absolutely no idea what was happening. Somehow, I knew it involved me, and whatever came next was about to change everything. For a few seconds nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The entire ballroom was focused on the stage. Focused on Jason. Focused on the group of executives carrying folders and metal cases toward him. And focused on me. The woman sitting at table 27. Near the kitchen. The woman who had arrived in a taxi. The woman they thought they knew. My hands were trembling. I kept telling myself this had to be some kind of thank you presentation. Maybe a plaque. Maybe a photo album. Maybe a sentimental gift. Something symbolic. Something sweet. Something reasonable. What happened next was none of those things. Jason waited until the executives reached the stage. Then he looked directly at me. His eyes were red from crying. Mine probably looked the same. "Aunt Emily," he said softly. "I need you to come up here." The room immediately turned toward me. I wanted to disappear. Honestly, I did. I hated being the center of attention. I always had. Especially around family. Because attention usually came with judgment, criticism, comparison, embarrassment. But tonight felt different. Margaret squeezed my hand. "Go." I laughed nervously. "I don't think I have a choice." She smiled. "No, dear. You really don't." The walk to the stage felt longer than any walk I had ever taken. Every eye followed me. Every step echoed in my head. As I passed certain tables, I noticed faces. Rebecca. Speechless. Michael. Confused. Several relatives who had spent years discussing my failures. Now staring at me as if they had never met me before. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe they only knew the version they created. When I reached the stage, Jason wrapped his arms around me. And for a moment, neither of us could speak. The ballroom disappeared. The audience disappeared. The embarrassment disappeared. There was only the little boy I had helped raise. And the woman who loved him like her own son. After a few seconds he stepped back, wiped his eyes, then smiled. "Okay." The audience laughed gently. Before I completely lose control of my emotions. More laughter. "I need to tell everyone something." Jason turned toward the crowd. When people hear success stories, they usually hear about the person who crossed the finish line. He paused. They rarely hear about the person who carried them when they couldn't walk. Silence. They rarely hear about the person who sacrificed opportunities. Or dreams. Or security. So someone else could have a future. The room was completely still. Then he looked directly at me. "I know what you gave up." I felt tears forming again. Because very few people knew. Very few. Even Sarah hadn't known everything. I never wanted her carrying that guilt. So I never told her. Jason continued. "When Aunt Emily stayed to help Mom during her treatments." His voice shook. "She turned down her dream job." Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Real gasps. Not polite reactions. Genuine shock. 'Cause nobody knew. Nobody. I saw Michael's expression change instantly. The color drained from his face. He knew about that opportunity. The entire family had known. But none of them knew why I rejected it. For 10 years they assumed I had made some terrible mistake. That I wasn't capable. That I wasn't ambitious. That I had somehow ruined my own future. The truth had been sitting quietly in the background all along. Jason wasn't finished. When she helped us survive Mom's illness, she emptied her savings. The room remained silent. When she invested in my company, she emptied them again. Another pause. And when the company finally succeeded, his voice softened. She refused every attempt I made to pay her back. I looked down. Because that part was true. Painfully true. The first time Jason offered me money, his company had just become profitable. He showed up at my apartment carrying a check. Very large check. One that would have changed my life. I refused it. The second time I refused again. The third time I got angry. Not because of the money. Because he didn't understand. I hadn't helped him for a return. I helped him because I loved him. Some things aren't investments. Some things are family. Jason smiled. Aunt Emily always said the greatest return on investment was watching people succeed. Several guests nodded. Then Jason laughed. Which sounds very inspiring. Few chuckles. But tonight, I'm ignoring her advice. The audience laughed louder. I narrowed my eyes. What are you doing? The room erupted into laughter. Jason grinned. Exactly what my lawyers told me not to explain too early. One of the executives handed him a black folder. The room became quiet again. Jason opened it. Then looked at me. Aunt Emily. His voice steadied. 5 years ago, you gave me a chance when nobody else would. You risked everything. And you've spent the last 5 years refusing to let me repay you. He nodded. Correct. Laughter spread through the ballroom. Jason smiled. Unfortunately, you no longer have a vote. The audience laughed again. Felt completely lost. Then he held up the folder. This contains legal documents approved 3 months ago. Blinked. 3 months. What? The executives exchanged smiles. Clearly they had been waiting for this moment. Jason continued. 6 months ago, our board unanimously voted to create a permanent ownership position. The audience listened carefully. Most didn't fully understand what that meant. I didn't either. Not yet. Then Jason delivered the sentence that changed everything. Aunt Emily Carter is now the second largest individual shareholder in our company. The ballroom exploded. Applause. Confusion. Every emotion imaginable. I stood frozen. Certain I had misunderstood. Absolutely certain. No. Jason laughed. Yes. No. More laughter. Yes. The executive beside him handed me the folder. My hand shook as I opened it. Pages. Signatures. Corporate documents. Ownership records. Numbers. Huge numbers. Life-changing numbers. The kind of numbers that don't feel real. The kind of numbers you expect to belong to someone else. Not you. Never you. My vision blurred. I couldn't process it. Couldn't comprehend it. Couldn't understand how this was happening. Then Jason spoke again. And somehow the next surprise was even bigger. Aunt Emily. I looked up. He reached toward one of the metal cases. Opened it. And removed a small silver object. The audience leaned forward. Curious. Confused. It was a key. A polished silver key mounted inside a glass display case. The company logo engraved beneath it. Jason smiled. When we moved into our first real headquarters, we made exactly one ceremonial key. He held it up. The room watched. We were saving it for the person who mattered most. His voice cracked again. And that's you. The audience rose to its feet. Not some. Not most. Hundreds of people standing. Applauding. Cheering. Crying. I looked across the ballroom. and saw something I never expected. Rebecca was crying. Michael was crying. Several relatives were wiping their eyes. Even strangers looked emotional. Because for the first time that evening, the story had become clear. Not the story they told themselves. The real story. The woman who arrived in a taxi wasn't unsuccessful. The woman seated near the kitchen wasn't unimportant. The woman everyone pitied wasn't behind in life. She had simply spent years building someone else's future. And nobody bothered to notice. Jason stepped forward, placed the display case in my hands, then hugged me one final time, and whispered something I'll never forget. You taught me that success isn't measured by what you keep. His voice shook. It's measured by what you give. At that moment I realized something. The ownership, the shares, the money, the recognition. None of that was the real gift. The real gift was something else. The truth. Finally being seen. Finally being understood. Finally having the story told correctly. For 10 years, people assumed my life was a tragedy. That night, they discovered it had been a legacy. And as I stood there holding the ceremonial key, surrounded by applause, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the people laughing at your journey only see the chapter you're standing in. They have no idea you're helping write someone else's ending. People think the biggest moment in a story is the reveal, the standing ovation, the shocking announcement, the dramatic twist that changes everything. But they're wrong. The hardest part comes afterward. When the applause fades. When people have time to think. When they realize what they've been wrong about. And when they have to decide what to do with that realization. The standing ovation lasted almost 2 full minutes. 2 minutes of applause. 2 minutes of tears. 2 minutes of people seeing me differently than they had seen me 10 minutes earlier. Felt surreal. Honestly, it felt like I was watching someone else's life. Because the Emily Carter I knew wasn't standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people. The Emily Carter I knew was the woman who bought generic groceries. The woman who clipped coupons. The woman who took taxis because she didn't own a car. The woman who spent years trying not to be noticed. Now suddenly everyone was looking at me. And I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Eventually the speeches ended. Music resumed. The wedding reception continued. But something had changed. The energy in the room felt different. People weren't looking through me anymore. They were looking at me. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. I barely made it off the stage before the first person approached. My brother Michael. For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply stood there. 2 siblings carrying 10 years of misunderstandings. 10 years of assumptions. 10 years of silence. Finally Michael sighed. A deep, exhausted sigh. The kind people make when they're confronting something painful. I owe you an apology. I smiled gently. You don't owe me anything. Actually, he said quietly. I think I do. His eyes looked different. Less confident. Less certain. More honest. I thought I knew what happened. He shook his head. I thought you made bad choices. I thought you gave up. Another pause. I thought I was helping when I kept telling you to get your life together. That one hurt. Not because it was cruel. 'Cause it was true. He had said those exact words more than once. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time in years I saw something important. Michael wasn't arrogant. Not really. He was operating on incomplete information. The same information everyone else had. He judged the visible results. Because he never knew the hidden costs. You couldn't have known, I said softly. He laughed bitterly. I could have asked. That sentence hung between us. Heavy. Painful. True. Because that's the thing about assumptions. Most of them survive because nobody asks questions. People see outcomes. Then invent explanations. And once they've invented those explanations, they stop being curious. Michael's eyes filled with tears. When Mom called me after your job offer. He stopped. His voice cracked. She told me you turned it down. He nodded. I remember. I spent 10 years believing you threw away your future. Now I find out you gave it away. Neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence says enough. Then he hugged me. Not the polite family hug from earlier. Real hug. The kind we hadn't shared in years. And for the first time that evening I felt something healing. Not dramatic. Not magical. Just healing. Low. Honest. Human. A few minutes later, another familiar face appeared. Rebecca. Course. Now, if this were one of those revenge stories on the internet, this is where Rebecca would get publicly humiliated. Where everyone would laugh at her. Where she'd be exposed. Where karma would strike dramatically. But real life is rarely that simple. And people are usually more complicated than villains and heroes. Rebecca approached cautiously. Almost nervously. Which was a first. I've never seen Rebecca nervous about anything. Emily. Hi, Rebecca. She looked down. Then back up. Then down again. Clearly struggling. Finally she laughed awkwardly. I had an entire speech prepared. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, yeah. She shook her head. Something dramatic. A nervous smile. Turns out none of it works when you're completely wrong. I couldn't help laughing. For the first time all night it felt genuine. Rebecca took a deep breath. I wasn't very kind to you. No. I was worse than not kind. I didn't answer. 'Cause honestly, she was handling that part herself. Her eyes glistened. You know what the worst part is. I shook my head. She laughed sadly. I genuinely thought I was better than you. The honesty caught me off guard. I thought success was a scoreboard. A competition. And I spent years comparing my life to yours. She looked around the ballroom. Then back at me. Turns out we weren't even playing the same game. That might have been the smartest thing Rebecca had ever said. 'Cause she was right. She had measured success using possessions. Titles. Appearances. Status. I had measured it differently. Not because I was better. 'Cause life forced me to. Rebecca wiped her eyes. I'm sorry. Simple sentence. No excuses. No qualifications. No if you were offended. Just sorry. And strangely enough, that was enough. Thank you, I said. She smiled. Relieved. And just like that, years of tension began dissolving. Not disappearing. Healing isn't instant. But beginning. Later that evening, something happened I never expected. Sarah pulled me aside. My sister looked beautiful. Healthy. Happy. Alive. Which was still a miracle in my mind. Even after all these years. We stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights. For a while, neither of us spoke. The music drifted through the glass behind us. Distant. Comforting. Then Sarah started crying. Immediately. Without warning. Oh no, I said. Don't do that. She laughed through tears. I'm already doing it. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. The same way I had done during countless hospital visits. Countless sleepless nights. Countless moments when neither of us knew what tomorrow would bring. Finally she looked at me. Jason told me everything. My stomach dropped. Everything. Apparently, yes. Everything. The job offer. The savings. The sacrifices. The opportunities. All of it. Her face crumpled. Why didn't you tell me? There it was. The question I'd been avoiding for 10 years. I smiled softly. Because the answer had never changed. Because you already had enough to carry. Sarah stared at me. Then completely lost the battle against her emotions. She cried harder than before. And honestly, so did I. For years she had believed she survived because of doctors, treatments, medicine, and those things mattered. Course they did. But survival is rarely a solo effort. It's a community effort, family effort, a love effort. Sarah grabbed my hand. You saved us. I shook my head immediately. No. You did. No. She squeezed harder. Emily. I looked out at the city lights, at the thousands of windows glowing in the darkness, and finally answered. I didn't save you. We survived together. Because that was the truth. The whole truth. And after years of being misunderstood, I had no interest in replacing one inaccurate story with another. Hours later, the reception began winding down. Guests left. Music faded. Tables emptied. The ballroom slowly returned to silence. Eventually I found myself standing outside the hotel. The cool night air felt wonderful after such an emotional evening. Then a black luxury SUV pulled up beside me. I laughed immediately, because I knew exactly who it was. Jason rolled down the window. Need a ride? I laughed. You know I came in a taxi. Exactly. He grinned. I'm trying to upgrade your transportation. For a moment I considered it. Then I smiled. Nah. Jason looked confused. What? I pointed toward a taxi waiting nearby. The driver was helping another passenger with luggage. Completely unaware of our conversation. I'll take the taxi. Jason blinked. Aunt Emily. I laughed. What? You own part of a company worth hundreds of millions now. Shrugged. Still like taxis. For a second he simply stared at me. Then burst into laughter. The kind that makes your stomach hurt. And soon I was laughing too. Because after everything that happened that night, after the speeches, the revelations, the apologies, tears, the standing ovation, one thing remained exactly the same. Me. I was still Emily Carter. Still the woman who believed people matter more than money. Still the woman who valued relationships over appearances. Still the woman who would make the same sacrifices again if it meant helping someone she loved. As the taxi pulled away from the hotel, I looked back one final time. The lights. At the celebration. At the family that was finally beginning to understand. And I thought about something Jason said earlier. Success isn't measured by what you keep. It's measured by what you give. That night I finally realized something else. Sometimes life rewards you. Not because you were chasing a reward, but because you were too busy helping someone else reach theirs. And those rewards, they often arrive long after everyone else has stopped paying attention. But when they arrive, they have a way of revealing who people really are, including you.